The rain lashing against the reinforced triple-pane glass of the 88th floor made absolutely no sound. That was the most unsettling thing about the Zenith Tower. The silence wasn't natural. It was engineered. It was a vacuum meticulously designed by architects who believed that the chaotic noise of the city below was a contagion to be kept out at all costs. Up here, in the sterile stratosphere of corporate power, the world was reduced to absolute zero. Arthur Pendleton stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring down at the sprawling, neon-soaked grid of the metropolis. From this altitude, the city didn't look like a place where people lived, loved, and died. It looked like a circuit board. And Arthur had spent the last 22 years acting as its primary surge protector. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice broke the silence, though it lacked any real warmth. Arthur turned slowly, his expression a mask of practiced neutrality. Marcus Sterling sat behind a desk carved from a single slab of reclaimed monolithic obsidian. At 31, Marcus was the youngest executive VP in the history of the corporation. He wore a suit that cost more than a standard employee's annual salary, cut sharply to emphasize the lean, hungry physique of a man who spent his mornings in high-altitude simulation chambers. Marcus's hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes, a pale icy blue, held the predatory glint of a shark circling wounded prey. "It is efficient," Arthur replied, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed entirely out of place in the antiseptic perfection of the office. "Efficiency has its own kind of beauty, I suppose." "Take a seat, Arthur," Marcus said, gesturing to the solitary chair positioned precisely in front of his desk. The chair was a minimalist contraption of chrome and white leather. It looked more like a surgical restraint than a piece of office furniture. Arthur did not move toward the chair. He remained by the glass. "I prefer to stand, Marcus. My joints aren't what they used to be. And your furniture was designed by someone who clearly hates the human spine." Marcus offered a tight, patronizing smile. He picked up a silver smart pen and began tapping it rhythmically against the obsidian surface. Top, top, top. The sound was crisp, amplified by the acoustic dampening of the room. Standing in the shadows by the heavy oak double doors was Vance. Vance wasn't an executive. He was the muscle. Officially, his title was head of executive asset protection. Unofficially, he was Marcus's attack dog. Vance was a mountain of a man, his broad shoulders straining against the fabric of his dark suit. A discreet earpiece coiled behind his left ear, and the slight bulge beneath his left armpit betrayed the presence of a suppressed tactical sidearm. Vance didn't speak. He just watched, his breathing slow and measured, his eyes tracking Arthur's every micro-movement. "Suit yourself," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. The silver pen twirled between his manicured fingers. "I asked you up here today, Arthur, because we are at a crossroads. The company is evolving. We are shifting from a reactive paradigm to a proactive, algorithmic infrastructure. You're turning on the Aegis protocol," Arthur said flatly. It wasn't a question. Marcus blinked, a flash of irritation crossing his flawless features. He hated when Arthur anticipated him. "Yes. Aegis goes online at midnight. The board approved it this morning. A fully autonomous, predictive AI that can scrub data breaches, neutralize cyber threats, and sanitize physical security liabilities in real time. It operates at a speed of 4 million calculations per second. And it doesn't ask for a pension," Arthur noted, adjusting the cuffs of his worn, gray tweed suit. He was 58 years old, and he knew he looked like a relic in this gleaming citadel of tomorrow. He was the sweeper. For 2 decades, when a rogue executive embezzled funds, when a prototype was stolen, when a server farm was infected with ransomware, Arthur was the one who went in and cleaned the mess. He left no traces. He was the ghost in the machine, the analog shadow in a digital world. "This isn't about money, Arthur," Marcus lied smoothly, his tone dripping with corporate empathy. "It's about redundancy. Your role. Your specific set of skills. They are legendary. Truly. But they are also a legacy system. You are a man, Arthur. A brilliant man, but a man nonetheless. You need sleep. You leave physical footprints. You have a conscience, however buried it might be. Aegis is flawless. Aegis is a machine, Arthur countered, his voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline spiking in his bloodstream. Machines only know the parameters they are programmed with. They don't understand human malice. They don't understand the irrationality of a desperate man. When the system fractures, and it will, Marcus, because all systems do, Aegis will look for logic where there is only chaos. It will fail. A comforting thought for a man being rendered obsolete, Marcus said, his smile turning cruel. He stopped tapping the pen. The decision is final. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Your severance package is generous, provided you sign the non-disclosure agreements. But as of this moment you are locked out. Arthur looked at the young executive. He felt a profound sense of coldness, but not from the aggressive air conditioning pumping through the hidden vents. It was the sterile, unfeeling nature of the execution. 22 years of burying the company's bodies, of protecting the very secrets that allowed Marcus to sit behind that obsidian desk, erased with a few corporate buzzwords. The protocol demands I collect your assets, Marcus continued, extending an open hand across the desk. Arthur reached into his breast pocket. Out in the periphery, Vance tensed, his hand dropping an inch closer to his lapel. Arthur ignored the brute, slowly withdrawing a sleek, black corporate datapad. He placed it gently on the obsidian desk. Next came his platinum access badge, the one with the highest security clearance in the building. Then a heavy ring of biometric dongles. Your primary comms unit as well, Marcus demanded. Arthur unclipped the encrypted smartphone from his belt and set it beside the badge. Is that satisfactory? Marcus nodded at Vance. Search him. Vance stepped forward, moving with surprising grace for a man of his immense size. He approached Arthur, his face an immovable slab of granite. Arms out, Vance rumbled. Arthur complied, raising his arms parallel to the floor. Vance conducted a thorough, invasive pat-down. His heavy hands checked Arthur's chest, the small of his back, down his legs and around his ankles. He squeezed the seams of Arthur's tweed jacket, feeling for hidden drives, micro SD cards, or unauthorized recording devices. Vance stepped back, holding up a small analog pocket watch, a leather wallet, and a tightly rolled black nylon umbrella with a polished wooden handle. Just personal effects, Vance grunted, placing the items on the edge of Marcus's desk. Marcus eyed the umbrella with disdain. An umbrella? It's a climate-controlled building, Arthur. You take a private subterranean transport to your apartment. It's raining outside, Arthur said evenly. I thought I might take a walk. Marcus scoffed, sliding the wallet and the watch back toward Arthur. He picked up the umbrella, turning it over in his hands. He popped the button, letting the canopy flare out a few inches before snapping it shut. He inspected the wooden handle, giving it a slight twist. Nothing. Just an old man's archaic accessory. Marcus tossed the umbrella back to Arthur, who caught it effortlessly by the shaft. Vance will escort you to the lobby, Marcus said, turning his attention to a holographic display that flickered to life on his desktop, instantly dismissing Arthur from his reality. Don't try to access the mainframe on your way out. Your biometric profile was scrubbed from the servers 3 minutes ago. You don't exist here anymore, sweeper. Arthur tucked his watch into his waistcoat and gripped the umbrella. Goodbye, Marcus. I hope Aegis serves you well. Marcus didn't look up. Let's go, old man, Vance said, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors. Arthur walked out of the office, his footsteps muffled by the thick, sound-absorbent carpeting of the executive corridor. Vance followed one pace behind, a silent, looming shadow. They walked in silence toward the central elevators. As they passed the glass-walled server rooms that lined the 88th floor, Arthur looked through the frosted panes. Inside, rows upon rows of monolithic black cabinets stood like soldiers in perfect formation, their blue and green LED lights blinking in rhythmic synchronization. The air in those rooms was kept at a freezing 55 degrees to keep the processors from melting down. Arthur knew every wire in those rooms. He had designed the routing architecture. He had written the subroutines that governed the cooling fans. He knew the heartbeat of the Zenith Tower better than he knew his own. And Marcus believed that a simple keystroke could erase him from the system. It was almost laughable. They reached the elevator bank. The doors, forged from brushed steel, parted silently at Vance's approach. Arthur stepped inside the mirrored cube, followed by the towering security chief. Vance pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner and selected the ground floor. The descent was rapid and utterly smooth, though the sudden drop in altitude caused a faint pressure in Arthur's ears. He watched the floor indicator numbers tick down at lightning speed. "Damn, you took it better than I thought," Vance said suddenly, his deep voice echoing in the confined space. Arthur kept his eyes on the digital display. "How did you expect me to take it, Vance? By throwing a tantrum? By begging?" "Most men do," Vance replied. "When they lose their power, they cry. Or they get violent. I was ready to break your jaw." "I have no doubt you could," Arthur said, an imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth. "But violence is the resort of the unprepared. I am never unprepared." Vance scoffed, crossing his massive arms. "You're empty-handed, Pendleton. You've got nothing left." Tin lobby. The elevator slowed, a soft chime announcing their arrival. The doors slid open to reveal the cavernous expanse of the Zenith Tower's ground floor. Unlike the vacuum of the 88th floor, the lobby hummed with the controlled chaos of corporate life. Hundreds of employees in tailored suits moved across the white marble floors, their footsteps echoing off the vaulted glass ceilings. Security drones hovered silently near the turnstiles, their red optic lenses scanning the crowd. Vance walked Arthur past the security checkpoints, leading him directly to the massive revolving glass doors at the front of the building. "This is as far as you go," Vance said, stopping just short of the exit. He looked down at Arthur, a hint of genuine pity in his cold eyes. "Have a good retirement, Arthur." Arthur didn't reply. He simply nodded, turning his collar up against the chill, and pushed his way through the revolving door. The moment he stepped past the threshold, the sensory deprivation of the Zenith Tower shattered. The roar of the city crashed into him like a tidal wave. The deafening hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the blaring horns of gridlocked traffic, the distant wail of a police siren, and the heavy rhythmic drumming of the torrential rain. The air was thick with humidity, smelling of ozone, exhaust, and wet concrete. Arthur stood on the wide concrete plaza beneath the shadow of the monolithic tower. The rain immediately began to soak the shoulders of his tweed suit. He didn't move toward the subterranean transport tunnels. Instead, he raised the black nylon umbrella and pressed the release catch. With a sharp thwack, the black canopy blossomed over his head, shielding him from the downpour. He stood there for a moment, listening to the heavy drops drumming against the nylon fabric. He looked back over his shoulder through the rain-streaked glass into the brightly lit lobby. He could see Vance walking away, speaking into his wrist comms, reporting the successful termination to Marcus. Arthur turned his gaze back to the street. A slow, chilling smile finally broke across his weathered face. Marcus Sterling was a fool. He understood hardware, he understood algorithms, but he didn't understand leverage. He didn't understand the sweeper's protocol. Arthur slid his right thumb down to the polished wooden handle of his umbrella. To Vance, to Marcus, to any scanner in the building, it was just solid oak. But Arthur's thumb found the microscopic indentation, hidden perfectly within the grain of the wood. He pressed his thumb against it, applying exactly 4 pounds of pressure while twisting the heavy silver ferrule at the base of the handle 90 degrees to the right. There was a tiny, barely audible click beneath the roar of the rain. The bottom half of the wooden handle slid downward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside the hollowed-out shaft, glowing with a faint, pulsing amber light, was a sleek, matte black titanium cylinder no larger than a stick of gum. It was a masterpiece of illicit engineering, a bespoke amalgamation of a physical skeleton key and a localized zero-day transmission drive. The digital matrix housed within the titanium shell contained the master root access codes to every server, every lock, every encrypted vault, and every surveillance feed in the Zenith Tower. It possessed a backdoor into the Aegis protocol itself, hard-coded into the architecture by Arthur 10 years ago, completely invisible to the AI's diagnostic sweeps. They had taken his badge. They had taken his comms. They had scrubbed his fingerprints from the system. But they had let him walk right out the front door holding the keys to the kingdom. Arthur snapped the wooden handle back into place, concealing the titanium drive once more. The amber light vanished. He adjusted his grip on the umbrella, feeling the comforting weight of absolute power resting in the palm of his hand. He stepped off the plaza and melted into the dense, flowing crowd of the city streets, just another ghost in the rain, ready to tear the Zenith Tower down to its foundations. In the opening scene, an aging man named Arthur Pendleton, disguised as a janitor, ascends a service elevator. He maintains a humble, weary posture to avoid attention, while reflecting on the cold efficiency of the corporation's recent personnel deletions. Upon reaching the executive floor, Arthur is intercepted by Vance, the muscular head of physical security. Arthur successfully uses a nervous persona and a story about a cleaning emergency to slip past the guard's scrutiny and gain access to the restricted area. Arthur infiltrates the high-security server farm and accesses the corporate database to uncover a secret plan to systematically eliminate perceived threats, including himself. His discovery triggers a security alarm, trapping him inside as the facility enters lockdown. The subterranean access node smelled of ozone, stagnant water, and the damp metallic tang of decaying infrastructure. Located 60 feet beneath the financial district, the concrete bunker was a forgotten relic of the city's telecom boom, now repurposed as a major fiber optic splicing point. It hummed with the latent energy of a million simultaneous digital conversations, a hive of glass threads carrying the lifeblood of global commerce. Arthur Pendleton knelt in the center of the gloom, the harsh, glacial blue light of his ruggedized laptop casting long, skeletal shadows against the weeping walls. His breath plumed in the chill air, but his hands were perfectly steady. They had to be. Clock's ticking, Artie, Vance murmured. Vance stood by the heavy steel door, a matte black suppressed submachine gun resting easily against his tactical vest. He was a man composed of sharp angles and coiled violence, his eyes hidden behind the green glow of thermal optics. He swept the corridor outside, watching the heat signatures of the city above, waiting for the inevitable moment when Marcus Sterling's hounds would catch the scent. "I need 60 seconds of silence, Vance," Arthur replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely cut through the ambient hum of the server racks. Arthur reached into the inner pocket of his coat and retrieved the drive. It was unremarkable to the naked eye, a simple brushed aluminum thumb drive. But inside its flash memory lay the architecture of a digital apocalypse. He had spent the last 3 weeks awake, fueled by amphetamines and an all-consuming rage, coding the virus. He called it the sweeper. It wasn't designed to steal. It was designed to butcher. He slotted the drive into the terminal. The machine chimed, a cheerful, innocuous sound that felt entirely out of place in the grim subterranean vault. Arthur's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second, a final fleeting moment of hesitation before crossing the Rubicon. Then they descended. The keystrokes were a staccato rhythm, sharp and precise. A black command prompt devoured the screen, followed by waterfalls of cascading green code. Arthur bypassed the local security protocols in less than 10 seconds, slipping through the city's network like a ghost. He routed his connection through a proxy in Reykjavik, bounced it to a server farm in Macau, and finally aimed the digital spear at the heart of the Caribbean. * target locked. Grand Cayman Central Depository. Node 4. * Marcus Sterling did not keep his illicit wealth in standard banks. The billionaire had amassed his fortune through corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and the systematic dismantling of his rivals, including Arthur. The money that funded his black ops, his bribes, and his private army was hidden in a labyrinth of offshore shell companies. "I'm at the gates," Arthur said, his eyes tracking the scrolling data. Sterling's using a bespoke intrusion countermeasure. Cerberus architecture. Can you break it? Vance asked, not turning from the door. I don't need to break it. I'm going to feed it. Arthur unleashed the sweeper. On the screen, the visual representation of the hack bloomed like a blood-red orchid. The virus didn't attack the firewall directly. Instead, it spawned tens of thousands of phantom login requests, flooding Sterling's automated defenses with garbage data. As the Cerberus protocol diverted its processing power to swat away the decoys, Arthur slipped the primary payload through a microscopic vulnerability in the server's handshake protocol. Asterisk access granted. Asterisk the vault opened. Arthur's screen partitioned into a dozen different windows, each representing a different shell company. Asterisk Aegis Holdings. Blackwood Logistics. Sunbird Enterprises. Asterisk the numbers beside them were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars, sitting in the dark, waiting to be weaponized by a man who viewed human lives as expendable assets. Initiating the hemorrhage, Arthur whispered. He typed in the final execution command. The sweeper went to work. It didn't transfer the funds to Arthur's accounts. That would leave a trail. Instead, the protocol began a systematic high-speed routing sequence, bouncing the money through thousands of randomized cryptocurrency exchanges, tumbling the digital coins until they were untraceable, and then donating the sums in microtransactions to thousands of randomized, untraceable wallets across the globe. The numbers on the screen began to plummet. Aegis Holdings, $42,500,000, $31,200,000, $14 million, $0. First account is flatlined, Arthur said, a grim satisfaction tightening his jaw. Across the city, in the vaulted, gold-leafed ballroom of the Obsidian Club, Marcus Sterling was holding court. The billionaire stood by a towering ice sculpture, a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon in his hand. He wore a midnight blue bespoke tuxedo that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. He was smiling, listening to a senator grovel for campaign funding, projecting the aura of a man who owned the world. Then the heavy platinum casing of his secure satellite phone vibrated against his ribs. Sterling ignored it. It vibrated again. A continuous, frantic buzzing that signified a level 1 critical alert. Frowning slightly, Sterling excused himself with a smooth, practiced apology and stepped away from the crowd, moving toward the shadowed alcove near the velvet-draped windows. He pulled the phone from his pocket and pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner. The screen illuminated his face in a harsh, unforgiving white light. Asterisk alert. Unauthorized withdrawal. Cayman Node 4. Asterisk alert. Critical fund depletion. Blackwood Logistics. Asterisk Sterling's breath hitched. The champagne flute in his hand tilted, spilling a few drops of the expensive vintage onto the polished marble floor. He watched, paralyzed by a sudden icy terror, as the balance of Blackwood Logistics dropped from 80 million to 0 in the span of 3 seconds. No, Sterling breathed, his voice barely a whisper. No, that's air-gapped. That's impossible. He frantically dialed his head of cybersecurity. The line rang twice before a panicked voice answered. Mr. Sterling, we're under attack. The offshore accounts. I see it, you incompetent fool. Sterling hissed, his veneer of aristocratic calm shattering entirely. His knuckles turned white around the phone. Cut the hard lines. Shut down the servers. Do whatever it takes to stop the bleed. We're trying, sir, but the administrative privileges have been rewritten. It's a worm. It's locking us out of our own systems. The routing speed, it's... Who is it? Sterling demanded, his voice trembling with the potent cocktail of rage and fear. Give me a name. The coding signature. Sir, it matches the proprietary algorithms we confiscated from Arthur Pendleton. Sterling froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax mannequin. Pendleton was supposed to be a ghost. Pendleton had been terminated, professionally, ruthlessly, and permanently. Or so Sterling had thought. Find him, Sterling snarled. his eyes scanning the ballroom as if Arthur might be hiding among the billionaires and socialites. Trace the connection. Send the strike teams to whatever physical location he's broadcasting from. I want his head on my desk by midnight. Back in the subterranean vault, the temperature in Arthur's laptop was spiking. The cooling fans screamed like jet engines as the processor maxed out. "Artie," Vance barked, his voice tight. "We just got a ping on the local grid. Sterling's ICE is tracing the connection backward. They're bypassing the Macau proxy." "I see it," Arthur said, his eyes darting across the cascading red warnings on his screen. "Sterling's security team is awake. They're trying to sever the trunk line." "How much longer?" 200 million left to drain," Arthur grunted, his fingers flying across the keys as he engaged a secondary firewall to stall the trace. "Give me 2 minutes. You have 90 seconds before they pinpoint this bunker, and maybe 3 minutes before a tactical team rappels down the elevator shaft," Vance stated clinically. He racked the bolt of his submachine gun. The sharp metallic clack echoed loudly in the damp room. Sunbird Enterprises, $115 million, $80 million, $40,000,000. The countermeasure algorithms were violently attacking Arthur's connection. His screen flickered, artifacts of corrupted data tearing across the UI. Sterling's team was deploying digital sledgehammers, trying to crush the bandwidth. Arthur responded with surgical precision, weaving the sweepers' data packets through the gaps in their attacks, keeping the pipeline open just wide enough to let the money bleed out. "They're inside the Reykjavik proxy," Arthur muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing temperature of the room. A drop stung his eye, but he didn't blink. "They're moving fast." 80 seconds, Vance warned. He stepped out of the room, moving into the dark corridor to cover the choke point. Sunbird Enterprises, $10 million, $0. "The accounts are empty," Arthur announced, a heavy exhale escaping his lungs. "The offshore hemorrhage is complete." "Then pull the plug and let's ghost," Vance yelled from the hall. "Not yet," Arthur shouted back. "If I disconnect now, they recover the server logs. They'll have a forensic trail to the crypto exchanges. They could reverse the tumbling sequence. I have to burn the bridge." Arthur opened a new command terminal. He didn't just need to delete the logs. He needed to salt the earth. He initiated a military-grade data wipe on Sterling's Cayman servers, writing strings of zeros over the hard drives, purging the event viewers, and scrambling the registry keys. Asterisk wipe progress, 20%, 40%. Asterisk the screen flashed a violent strobing red. Asterisk warning. Physical location compromised. Trace complete. Asterisk they have us, Arthur said, his voice eerily calm. "They know we're under the financial district." "I hear them," Vance replied. From far above, echoing down the concrete ventilation shafts, came the distinct, heavy thud of combat boots and the screech of tires on wet asphalt. Sterling's private security, mercenaries operating under corporate immunity, were swarming the plaza above. Asterisk wipe progress, 65%, 80%. Asterisk. "Artie, we need to move now." Vance's laser sight cut a sharp red line through the darkness of the corridor, aiming at the ceiling grate. 10 seconds. Arthur's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He watched the progress bar crawl agonizingly slow. The laptop's battery was draining rapidly, the hardware buckling under the sheer volume of data it was processing. Asterisk 85%, 90%, 95%. Asterisk dust fell from the ceiling as heavy footfalls pounded on the grating directly above them. The distinct sound of an acetylene torch igniting echoed down the shaft. They were cutting through the primary maintenance hatch. Asterisk 98%, 99%. Asterisk. "Artie!" Vance roared, taking a step back into the room, his weapon raised. Asterisk 100%. Logs purged. Asterisk. "Done." Arthur slammed his hand down on the escape key, violently yanked the brushed aluminum drive from the USB port, and slammed the laptop shut. The sudden absence of the screen's harsh glare plunged the room into a deep, oppressive darkness, save for the green glow of Vance's optics and the sparks raining down from the ventilation shaft above. Arthur shoved the scalding hot laptop into his reinforced messenger bag and grabbed the drive, slipping it securely into his breast pocket. He felt the phantom weight of billions of dollars erased, of Marcus Sterling's empire crippled in a matter of minutes. "Through the service tunnels," Vance commanded, grabbing Arthur by the shoulder and shoving him toward the secondary egress point at the back of the vault. "They're breaching the main hatch." As they sprinted into the lightless labyrinth of the city's underbelly, the heavy steel grate behind them gave way with a deafening crash, followed by the sweep of high-lumen tactical flashlights. Shouts echoed off the damp concrete. But they were too late. Arthur and Vance melted into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the smell of ozone, a severed fiber optic cable, and the digital corpse of an empire. Marcus Sterling's shadow bank was dead. The sweeper protocol had worked flawlessly. But as Arthur ran, his boots splashing through the ankle-deep water of the service tunnel, his heart pounded with a dark, terrifying realization. He had just drawn first blood against a man who would burn the world to ashes to get his revenge. The digital war was over. The physical war had just begun. The Obsidian Room, perched atop the 88th floor of the Sterling Spire, was a monument to Marcus Sterling's ego, engineered in glass and steel. Tonight it was bathed in the warm golden luminescence of a chandelier constructed from 10,000 cascading fiber optic cables, each strand pulsing in sync with the heartbeat of a live string quartet. They were playing a Vivaldi arrangement of a modern synth-pop anthem. The aggressive bass smoothed out into a luxurious sweeping melody that drifted over the heads of Manhattan's elite. Marcus stood at the precise geographic center of the room, exactly where the architect had told him the acoustics were best and the sightlines most commanding. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo woven with actual silver thread, a subtle nod to his surname that most of the sycophants in the room were too uncultured to notice, but which he delighted in wearing nonetheless. In his left hand, he held a crystal flute of Laurent Perrier. His right rested in the pocket of his trousers, his thumb absently stroking the cold ceramic edge of his proprietary Sterling X smartphone. "It's not just about market share, Senator," Marcus said, flashing a blinding, meticulously veneered smile at the silver-haired politician standing before him. "It's about infrastructure. The data we process isn't just numbers. It's human behavior. We aren't predicting the future. We're architecting it." The senator nodded, looking suitably awed, while his wife stared at Marcus with the glassy, predatory gaze of a woman who appreciated power more than she appreciated her husband. Marcus took a sip of his champagne, letting the crisp, dry bubbles burst against his tongue. He felt invincible. He was a god upon Mount Olympus, looking down at the glittering, smog-choked grid of New York City through floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows. Every person in this room, the tech magnates, the venture capitalists, the legacy media science, had come to kiss the ring. Tomorrow, Sterling Industries would announce its acquisition of the largest decentralized data grid in the hemisphere. His net worth was slated to cross the $100 billion threshold. He was immortal. Then his pocket vibrated. It was a custom haptic pulse, 2 short beats, 1 long. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a social media alert. It was a Tier 1 financial notification. Marcus kept his smile plastered on his face as he smoothly withdrew the ceramic device. He excused himself from the senator with a practiced nod and tapped the biometric sensor on the screen. The display bloomed to life, projecting a crisp, minimalist interface. It was an alert from the Cayman routing server. The offshore slush fund, a deeply buried account used for aggressive unlisted corporate acquisitions, had triggered a balance irregularity. Marcus frowned, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He tapped the notification. Account balance, $0. A cold, tiny prick of annoyance flared at the base of his neck. A glitch. It had to be a UI error. The Cayman's account held just over $400 million. It didn't just drop to zero. "Vance," Marcus murmured, not turning his head. From the shadows near a towering ice sculpture of the Sterling Industries logo, A man detached himself. Vance moved with the terrifying grace of a predator forced into a tailored suit. He was broad-shouldered, his head shaved clean, a coiled acoustic tube curling behind his right ear. As Marcus's head of security and chief fixer, Vance was paid a seven-figure salary to ensure that Marcus's reality remained perfectly curated. "Sir," Vance said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the clinking of crystal and the swell of the cellos. "Get on the horn with Geneva," Marcus said, his eyes still locked on the screen. "There's a routing error on the Cayman ledger. The front end is displaying a zero balance. Tell the dev team if they push an untested UI update to my personal dashboard again, I'll fire the entire department." Vance touched his earpiece, his pale eyes scanning the crowd out of pure habit. "Copy that. Pinging them now." Marcus hit the refresh icon. The screen loaded. Account balance, $0. A second notification dropped down from the top of the screen. Then a third. Alert. Seychelles holding 44A balance irregularity. Alert. Isle of Man trust balance irregularity. Marcus's breath hitched. The air in the obsidian room suddenly felt entirely too thin. The scent of roasted truffles and expensive perfume morphing into something cloying and suffocating. He tapped the new alerts, his thumb suddenly slick with sweat against the glass. Seychelles, $0. Isle of Man, $0. "Vance," Marcus said, the carefully cultivated timbre of his voice cracking. "Vance, what the hell is going on?" "Sir, Geneva isn't responding," Vance said, stepping closer. For the first time in the 5 years Marcus had known him, a faint sheen of perspiration gleamed on Vance's forehead. "Actually, none of the internal comms are responding. The network is bouncing my clearance." "What do you mean bouncing?" Marcus snapped, turning his back on the gala, shielding his phone with his body. "You have beta level override." "It's saying my credentials don't exist," Vance replied, pulling a sleek, hardened tablet from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. His thick fingers flew across the glass. "I'm locked out. The whole security subnet is. It's just gone. It's not crashing. It's being erased." Ping. Marcus looked down. The notifications weren't just trickling in now, they were a waterfall. Alert. Swiss Mutual 909 transfer complete. Alert. Zurich Private Equities transfer complete. Alert. Sterling Personal Checking transfer complete. "Stop it," Marcus hissed at the phone, as if the device itself were disobeying him. He jabbed his thumb against the screen, trying to access the master kill switch for his financial architecture. "Biometric rejected." "What?" Marcus whispered. He wiped his thumb on his tuxedo pants and pressed it again, harder, the glass bending under the pressure. "Biometric rejected. User unknown." "Vance, cut the hard lines. Shut down the main servers." Marcus's voice rose, turning a few heads among the glittering crowd. He didn't care. The blood was roaring in his ears, a deafening tide of panic drowning out the string quartet. The numbers on his net worth aggregator, a custom widget he kept on his home screen to stroke his ego throughout the day, were spinning backward like a slot machine in hell. $42,500,000,000. $31,200,000,000. $18,400,000,000. It was evaporating. Decades of ruthless corporate warfare, blackmail, leverage, and brilliant predatory mathematics, all dissolving into the digital ether. "I can't, sir." Vance was tapping frantically on his tablet, his usual stoicism shattering. "The automated defense protocols are offline. The encryption keys are rewriting themselves. Whoever is doing this, they're inside the root architecture. They have alpha-level access." Alpha-level. The word struck Marcus like a physical blow to the sternum. There were only 2 people in the world who had ever possessed alpha-level access to the deepest catacombs of the Sterling mainframe. Marcus was one. The other was the man who had built it. The man Marcus had unceremoniously fired, humiliated, and blacklisted from the industry just 3 weeks ago. Arthur Pendleton. "Arthur," Marcus choked out, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's him. It's the sweeper." Pendleton. Vance looked up, his eyes wide. That's impossible. We stripped his credentials. We scrubbed his digital footprint. I watched the IT team physically destroy his hard drives. He built the damn house, Vance. You think he didn't leave a back door? Marcus grabbed Vance by the lapels of his suit, the champagne flute shattering on the floor, splashing expensive wine over his Italian leather shoes. Stop him. I don't care what it takes. Pull the fire alarm, burn the servers, empty the goddamn building. Sir, look, Vance whispered, ignoring Marcus's hands on him, staring in horror at his tablet. Marcus let go and looked. It wasn't just the money anymore. A new window had opened on Vance's screen. It was an email client, mass distributing files to thousands of addresses. The recipients were the SEC, the FBI, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and every major competitor Sterling Industries had. Attachment. Project zip attachment. Senatorial bribes ledger 2024 PDF attachment. Offshore his digital legacy, his secrets, the very foundation of his empire, cracked open and spilled out for the world to feast upon. The sweeper's protocol wasn't just draining his wealth. It was salting the earth. It was a complete systematic deletion of Marcus Sterling as a man of power. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the glass of the window. His breath fogged the cold pane. He looked out at the glittering city, feeling a sudden terrifying vertigo. He wasn't a god. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, and the lever had just been pulled. He looked down at his phone one last time. The screen had stopped flashing. The interface was entirely blank, save for a single line of plain white text in the center of the black screen. Trash emptied. Then the phone bricked. The screen went dead. It was just a useless piece of ceramic and glass in his trembling hand. Marcus let out a ragged, high-pitched gasp. A sound so pathetic he wouldn't have believed himself capable of making it. He turned back to the room. The gala was still going. The string quartet was still playing. The billionaires were still laughing, drinking, oblivious to the fact that the host of the party was bleeding out in front of them, his throat cut by an invisible blade. Through the blur of his panicked vision, Marcus's eyes darted wildly across the room, searching for a phantom, and then he saw him. Near the grand entrance, standing perfectly still amidst the swirling chaos of waiters and socialites, was a man in the simple, tailored black uniform of the catering staff. He held a silver tray, collecting discarded, empty champagne glasses. His posture was unassuming, his head bowed, the very picture of invisible blue-collar servitude. But as Marcus stared, the man slowly raised his head. Arthur Pendleton. Arthur's face was completely devoid of malice. There was no triumphant sneer, no cartoonish villainy. He looked exactly as he had in the basement servers. Tired, methodical, and utterly indifferent. Arthur met Marcus's terrified, bloodshot eyes across the expanse of the obsidian room. For a single agonizing second the world stopped spinning. The music faded into a dull underwater hum. Arthur didn't wave. He didn't nod. He simply reached out with his free hand, picked up a stray napkin from a cocktail table, and meticulously wiped a single drop of spilled condensation off his silver tray. He was cleaning up, sweeping the board. With quiet precision, Arthur turned his back on the ruined billionaire and walked out the double doors, disappearing into the shadows of the service corridor. Sir. Vance's voice sounded like it was coming from 1,000 miles away. Sir, the police. The scanners are picking up police sirens. Multiple units. They're heading for the spire. Marcus's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the pristine white marble floor, the sharp remnants of his shattered champagne glass biting into the palms of his hands. He didn't feel the pain. He didn't feel anything at all save for the cold, crushing weight of absolute zero. The air on the 80th floor of the Sterling Vanguard Tower did not feel like air at all. It felt like liquid nitrogen, heavily filtered and aggressively circulated, designed to preserve machines, not men. Arthur Pendleton crouched in the absolute darkness of the air-gapped server vault, his breath pluming in faint, ghostly clouds. This was the apex of Marcus Sterling's empire. the architectural marvel known to the board as the transparent paradigm. Marcus, in his boundless narcissistic hubris, had commissioned the master server floor to be built entirely of blast-proof, floor-to-ceiling glass. There were no opaque drywall partitions, no solid metal doors, just row upon row of matte black server racks suspended within a sprawling, interlocking labyrinth of transparent corridors. During the day, bathed in sunlight, it was a testament to Sterling Vanguard's supposed corporate transparency. Tonight, with the main breakers severed and the emergency lighting disabled by Arthur's earlier intrusions, the glass labyrinth was a terrifying hall of mirrors. The only illumination came from the ambient, bleeding neon of the Manhattan skyline outside, casting distorted, elongated shadows across the frost-chilled floor. Arthur's fingers flew across the ruggedized keyboard of the master terminal. His knuckles were bruised, a parting gift from his narrow escape at the gala an hour prior. His tuxedo jacket was gone, his tie discarded, his white shirt damp with cold sweat. He didn't look like the invisible corporate cleaner he had been for the past 10 years. He looked like a man tearing down a temple with his bare hands. He plugged the modified solid-state drive into the terminal's physical port. This was it. The Genesis ledgers. The final untouchable air-gapped backups of every illicit transaction, every bribed official, every offshore hemorrhage he had uncovered in Chapter 3. Because the vault was disconnected from the outside world, Marcus believed it was invincible. But Marcus had forgotten that a system is only as secure as the man with the keys. And for a decade, Arthur had held them all. He executed the final stage of the sweeper's protocol, a deep-level magnetic scrub. He wasn't just deleting the directories, he was overwriting the drives with zeros 7 times over, burning the empire to the ground byte by byte. A progress bar appeared on the terminal's muted, low-brightness screen. Asterisk wipe initiated. Progress. 2% asterisk. Arthur exhaled a shaky breath, the adrenaline crash threatening to pull him under. The hum of the massive HVAC units provided a steady vibrating drone that rattled in his molars. He watched the percentage tick to 3%. It was going to take time. Too much time. Then the harmonic hum of the floor was broken by a sound that made the blood freeze in Arthur's veins. Ding! The VIP elevator, operating on an independent, hardwired generator circuit, chimed at the far end of the floor. Arthur instantly dropped to his knees, sliding behind the monolithic black steel of server rack Alpha 4. He pressed his back against the cold metal, pulling his knees to his chest, making himself as small as possible. The heavy pneumatic hiss of the elevator doors parting echoed through the glass corridors. Then came the boots. Not the soft, leather-soled footfalls of late-night IT technicians, but the heavy, synchronized thud of tactical combat boots. Spread out. Thermal optics are blind in here with the server heat, a voice commanded. Low, gravelly, and devoid of any human warmth. Vance, Marcus Sterling's chief of security, a man who solved corporate liabilities with unmarked vans and concrete foundations. He cut the main power, but he can't kill the backups without a physical uplink. Check the core. Instantly, for blindingly brilliant shafts of halogen light pierced the darkness. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut as a beam swept over the glass wall just inches above his head. The tactical flashlights were staggeringly powerful. In the glass labyrinth, the light didn't just illuminate. It weaponized the architecture. The beam struck the transparent panes, refracting and splintering into dozens of secondary shafts, bouncing off polished steel and glass, creating a chaotic, dizzying kaleidoscope of blinding white glares and pitch-black shadows. Vance! The voice crackled over the security chief's shoulder radio. It was Marcus. The pristine, PR-polished baritone was entirely gone, replaced by the ragged, breathless shriek of a cornered animal. Arthur could hear the chaos of the ruined gala in the background. Sirens wailing, elites screaming. The utter collapse of Marcus's public image. Vance, tell me you have him. Marcus bellowed through the radio static. Entering the vault now, sir, Vance replied, his tone chillingly level, a stark contrast to his employer's panic. His heavy boots took a step forward. Crunch, He was stepping on the shattered glass of the security door Arthur had bypassed. The perimeter was breached. He's here. The ledgers, Vance. The Genesis files. If he burns those servers, I have nothing. The SE, the feds, the cartels, they'll all have my head. I am a dead man, Vance. Kill him. Put a bullet in his skull and secure that terminal. Copy that, Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He clicked his radio off. You heard the boss, he told his 3 sweepers. Shoot to kill. Suppressors on. Don't hit the mainframe. Asterisk wipe initiated. Progress. 14% asterisk. Arthur glanced at the terminal screen from around the edge of the rack. 14%. It was crawling. He looked through the layered panes of glass. 50 yards away, he could see the 4 men. They moved with terrifying predatory discipline. They didn't clump together. They fanned out into a diamond formation, their flashlight beams sweeping in overlapping arcs, leaving no dark corner unsearched. They wore matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, assault rifles raised and tucked tightly into their shoulders. Arthur was unarmed. He had a laptop, a rigged flash drive, and 10 years of intimate knowledge of this building's blueprints. A beam of light sliced through the glass partition directly to Arthur's left. It hit the polished floor and bounced upward, illuminating the ceiling tiles. Arthur held his breath. His lungs burned. If he exhaled too loudly, if his damp shoe squeaked against the floor, he was dead. Clear. One of the mercenaries muttered, a ghost in the dark. Keep moving. He's making for the central hub, Vance ordered. Asterisk wipe initiated. Progress. 31% asterisk. They were getting closer. Arthur could smell the gun oil on their weapons, the sharp tang of their synthetic tactical gear. He needed a distraction. He needed to buy time for the wipe to finish. Reaching into his pocket, Arthur withdrew his heavily encrypted smartphone. His thumb flew across the screen, accessing the building's localized maintenance subnet. The network was heavily partitioned, but Arthur had spent the last 5 years quietly building backdoors into every secondary system. He bypassed the environmental controls and tapped into the fire suppression logic for the east wing of the 80th floor, a localized server farm opposite his current position. He selected the command. Asterisk override. Trigger Halon purge. Asterisk. He delayed the execution by 10 seconds, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and pressed his hands flat against the cold floor. 10, 9, 8. The sweepers were 20 yards away. Vance's flashlight beam caught a reflection in the glass. A trick of the light, an infinite regression of server racks fading into the dark. Vance paused, his rifle barrel tracking the phantom image. 3, 2, 1. On the far side of the massive floor, a klaxon screamed to life, deafening and sudden. Emergency amber strobes ignited, violently flashing against the glass walls. HSSSSSSSS. The pressurized halon gas deployed from the ceiling vents in the east wing, flooding the distant glass enclosures with a thick, opaque white fog. East wing. Move! Vance barked. 3 of the flashlight beams immediately whipped away, their wielders sprinting down the glass corridors toward the source of the alarm, their boots hammering against the floor. But Vance didn't run. Arthur watched in horror through 3 layers of transparent glass as the security chief slowly lowered his radio. Vance was a veteran. He didn't chase ghosts. He knew a misdirection when he saw one. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness of the central hub. The amber strobes from the east wing pulsed weakly across his scarred face. Asterisk wipe initiated. Progress. 68% asterisk. Vance began to walk toward the central hub. He moved differently than his men. No heavy thuds. He placed his feet with agonizing care, rolling from heel to toe, completely silent. Arthur began to crawl. He couldn't stay behind Alpha 4. He slithered on his stomach, moving inch by agonizing inch, navigating the narrow gap between the server racks and the glass partition. The floor was freezing, biting through his thin shirt. The amber light flashed. Asterisk pulse dark, pulse dark. Asterisk every time it pulsed, Arthur froze, terrified that his silhouette would be cast against the glass. Asterisk wipe initiated. Progress. 82%. Asterisk Vance was 10 yards from the master terminal. He raised his flashlight, turning it back on. The beam carved through the dark, sweeping left, then right. Arthur crawled behind server rack Beta 2. He was now only 15 feet from the terminal. If Vance saw the faint glow of the monitor, it was over. Arthur had turned the brightness all the way down, but in the pitch blackness of the room, even a muted screen emitted a faint, unearthly blue halo. The flashlight beam swept over the terminal desk. It paused. Vance stepped forward. He saw the blue halo. Found him. Vance whispered into his radio. Central hub. Collapse on my position. Vance raised his rifle, stepping into the enclosure. He saw the terminal. He saw the progress bar. Asterisk wipe initiated. Progress. 94%. Asterisk. Cancel it, Vance said to the empty air, his voice echoing in the glass chamber. Step out from wherever you are, Pendleton, and cancel the wipe. You have 5 seconds before I start putting rounds through every rack in this room. Arthur didn't move. He did the math in his head. The hard drive was a high-speed solid-state. It was dumping gigabytes of dummy data a second. Progress. 97%. 5. Vance counted down, his flashlight beam violently jerking around the room, illuminating empty spaces and glass reflections. Progress. 98%. 4. You're a janitor, Arthur. You're out of your depth. Progress. 99%. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy steel multi-tool. He gripped it tight. 3. A sudden high-pitched mechanical whine filled the room. The massive server fans surrounding them suddenly spooled down. The heavy vibrating hum in the floor ceased. The rows of tiny green and blue LED lights on the server racks flickered, and then in a rolling wave of finality died. The terminal screen flashed one final message in stark, bright white letters, illuminating the entire enclosure. Asterisk wipe complete. 0 fragmentation. Asterisk. Arthur hurled the heavy steel multi-tool over the server rack. It sailed through the air and smashed violently into the glass wall directly behind Vance. Vance spun, his rifle roaring to life. Thwip, 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 thwip. The suppressed weapon spat fire, the muzzle flash strobing the room in stark relief. The bullet struck the tempered glass. For a fraction of a second, the pane held spiderwebbing with brilliant white fractures. Then it catastrophically failed. The glass shattered with the sound of a collapsing glacier. A waterfall of diamonds cascaded to the floor, millions of razor-sharp fragments raining down in the dark. The noise was deafening, disorienting. Vance shielded his face, taking a half-step back. It was all the time Arthur needed. He lunged from the shadows, his hand shooting out to the terminal. He ripped the flash drive from the port. Vance recovered instantly, swinging the rifle back toward the movement. He fired blindly into the dark. A bullet grazed the fabric of Arthur's sleeve, snapping through the air with the angry crack of a whip. Another struck the terminal monitor, exploding it in a shower of sparks and plastic. Arthur didn't flinch. He dove forward, sliding on his stomach across the slick floor, the jagged shards of broken glass tearing at his clothes and biting into his forearms. He scrambled toward the maintenance hatch located at the rear of the central hub, a 2-foot square steel grate he had unlatched 3 hours ago. He's here, Vance bellowed, his flashlight wildly searching the floor. The beam caught Arthur's shoe just as he swung his legs down into the dark abyss of the maintenance shaft. Vance sprinted forward, firing 3 more rounds. The bullet sparked off the heavy steel rim of the hatch, ricocheting into the darkness. But Arthur was already gone. He slid down the steep, greasy incline of the ventilation shaft, plunging into the total, suffocating blackness of the building's bowels. He clutched the flash drive tightly in his bleeding fist. The servers were dead. The backups were ash. Marcus Sterling's empire was officially a ghost. Now there was only one thing left to do. It was time to introduce Marcus to the ghost he had created. The air in the Genesis vault tasted of chilled copper and manufactured perfection. Perched at the absolute pinnacle of the Sterling Tower, Level 88 was a temple dedicated to the modern god of data. Row upon row of monolithic server racks stretched across the expansive floor, their polished obsidian surfaces reflecting a sea of pulsing blue and emerald LEDs. Ambient cooling fans roared in a ceaseless synthetic blizzard, keeping the ambient temperature at a brisk 52 degrees. Here, in the belly of the beast, lived the digital soul of Marcus Sterling. Every offshore account, every shell company registry, every black market deed, every algorithmic trading protocol that siphoned wealth from the desperate to the gluttonous. It all resided in this freezing, blinking labyrinth. And standing at the exact center of it all was Arthur Pendleton. He wore the same faded blue canvas coveralls he had worn for the last 22 years. A ring of heavy brass keys hung from his belt, clinking softly against his thigh with every methodical step. In his right hand, he held the worn wooden handle of his industrial mop. In his left, a ruggedized tablet he had spliced into the master terminal of the Genesis rack. Arthur did not look like a conqueror. He looked exactly like what Marcus Sterling had called him in Chapter 1. A nobody. An obsolete relic. A smudge on the pristine glass of progress. But Arthur knew something the billionaires and the tech visionaries never understood. The man who cleans the floors knows every crack in the foundation. Arthur set his mop down, leaning it gently against the primary server housing. He plugged the fraying end of a Cat7 cable into the port he had exposed by removing a baseboard panel, a physical backdoor he had installed 3 years ago, while polishing the very floor he now stood upon. The tablet screen flared to life, casting a harsh, pale glow over Arthur's deeply lined face. Lines of code, elegant and devastating, began to spool across the glass. The sweeper's protocol. It was fully armed, fed by the offshore hemorrhage he had initiated days ago, and primed by the network vulnerabilities he had exploited during the gala. Suddenly, the heavy magnetic locks of the vault's reinforced doors cycled with a violent clack. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from his screen as the heavy steel and glass doors were shoved open. Marcus Sterling burst into the frozen sanctuary, his breath pluming in the cold air. He was a portrait of unraveling grandeur. The bespoke Brioni tuxedo he had worn to his ill-fated gala was torn at the shoulder, the silk lapel stained with spilled scotch and sweat. His silver hair, usually coiffed into a helmet of intimidating authority, clung to his forehead in damp, ragged strands. Behind him stepped Vance. The head of security moved with the predatory grace of a cornered wolf, though he was limping slightly, a souvenir from the trap Arthur had sprung in the glass labyrinth on level 70. Vance's hand was wrapped tightly around the grip of a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol, the muzzle tracking straight toward Arthur's chest. "Step away from the console, Pendleton." Sterling's voice cracked, shrill and frantic, echoing off the rows of servers. "Step away right now, or I swear to God, Vance will paint this pristine floor with your brains." Arthur slowly looked up. He didn't raise his hands. He merely adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He stood behind a secondary wall of bulletproof, EMP-shielded polyglass that enclosed the central servers. He had dropped the blast doors the moment he entered. Vance could shoot all he wanted. The rounds would only flatten against the barrier. Vance stepped up to the glass, his cold, dead eyes assessing the barrier. He lowered the weapon slightly, recognizing the polycarbonate weave. He looked back at Sterling and gave a single grim shake of his head. They were locked out. "Arthur." Sterling stepped forward, pressing his manicured hands against the thick glass. The billionaire's face was pale, his arrogance bleeding out into sheer unadulterated terror. "Arthur, please. Listen to me. The offshore drain, the gala. You've made your point. You've humiliated me. You proved you're not just a janitor. I see you now. I respect you." Arthur's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, calm, and carried perfectly through the intercom system. "You don't see me, Mr. Sterling. You only see the mess you're in. I can fix it," Sterling pleaded, his breath fogging the glass between them. Whatever you want. Money. I have liquidity you can't even fathom. 50 million. Right now. Wired to any account. Anywhere in the world. You can retire to a private island. You'll never have to look at a mop again. Just don't hit the execution key. Please. Arthur looked at the mop leaning against the server rack. The wood was smooth, polished by years of the oils from his own hands. It was an honest tool. It removed filth. It restored order. I don't want your money, Marcus, Arthur said softly. Your money is dirty. It was built on the foreclosures of families who couldn't read your fine print. It was built on the pensions of workers you laid off to boost your quarterly margins. It's a stain. And for 22 years my only job in this building has been to clean up stains. Arthur, you're being irrational. You're talking about billions of dollars. You're talking about my legacy. My life. Sterling slammed his fists against the glass, the loud thud swallowed by the roar of the cooling fans. Arthur's eyes drifted back to the screen. The terminal blinked, awaiting the final command. When you fired me, Arthur said, his tone conversational, devoid of malice, you told me that men like me are easily erased. You said we leave no footprint. You called me a nobody. I was angry. I was wrong. Sterling shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. You were right, Arthur corrected him. I am a nobody. I have no digital footprint. I have no legacy. I simply exist and I do the work. But you, Mr. Sterling, you are entirely digital. You are nothing but a footprint. Arthur pressed the enter key. The physical response of the room was instantaneous. The ocean of blue and emerald LEDs across the vast server farm flashed a violent, synchronized crimson. The deep bass-heavy hum of the data drive suddenly pitched upward into a chaotic whine, followed by a profound, terrifying silence as the spinning disks began to drop their magnetic heads and wipe themselves clean. No! Sterling screamed, pressing his face against the glass. Vance! Break it! Break the glass! Vance didn't move. The security chief was staring at his own smartphone. Inside the vault, Arthur watched the telemetry on his tablet. It was a masterpiece of digital eradication. The sweeper's protocol wasn't just emptying bank accounts. It was dissolving the architecture of Sterling's existence. It was executing a cascading zero-fill across every proprietary server. Property deeds were being overwritten with garbage data. Cryptocurrency wallets were being burned. Their private keys scrambled into the void. Shell company registries in the Caymans and Switzerland were receiving forged dissolution orders, authenticated by Sterling's own stolen biometric keys. 0. The numbers on Arthur's screen tumbled in freefall. 14 billion. 10 billion. 5. 1. Millions vanished in milliseconds. Then the final command executed. The servers didn't just wipe. They bricked themselves. The crimson lights died. The cooling fans sputtered and spun down to a halt. The room was plunged into an eerie, suffocating silence, lit only by the pale emergency backup lights near the exits. Marcus Sterling fell to his knees. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, his chest heaving, his mouth open in a silent, agonizing wail. The empire was gone. The legacy was ash. He was legally, financially, and digitally non-existent. Vance slipped his smartphone back into his tailored jacket. He looked down at the weeping billionaire. My offshore retainer just zeroed out, Vance said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual lethal edge. Sterling didn't look up. He just kept clawing weakly at the floor. Shoot him. Sterling sobbed. Kill him. Vance looked through the glass at Arthur. Arthur met the mercenary's gaze with calm, unwavering eyes. Vance gave a short, cynical scoff. He ejected the magazine from his pistol, caught it in his palm and tossed it onto the floor. I don't work for free, Vance said. He turned on his heel, his footsteps echoing sharply in the newly silent room, and walked out the door, leaving his employer broken on the floor. With a soft click, Arthur disengaged the magnetic seal of the glass enclosure. The heavy doors slid open. Arthur stepped out into the aisle. He stood over Sterling. The billionaire was trembling violently, his hands clutching his own hair. He had absolutely nothing. No money to pay lawyers. No properties to leverage. He was a ghost trapped in a ruined shell of glass and steel. Arthur reached up to his chest. He unclipped his plastic employee name tag. *Arthur, Facilities*, and let it fall. It clattered against the metallic grate of the floor. Then he unclipped the heavy ring of brass master keys from his belt. He walked over to the dead, blackened Genesis rack. He placed the keys gently on the server housing. He looked at his yellow mop, still leaning against the metal where he had left it. "You missed a spot, Marcus," Arthur said quietly. Sterling didn't answer. He just wept. Arthur turned his back on the ruins of the Sterling Empire and walked toward the vault doors. He didn't run. He walked with the slow, measured pace of a man whose shift had finally come to an end. He took the private executive elevator down 88 floors. The descent was smooth, silent, a gentle transition from the frozen heavens back down to the earth. The doors parted at the lobby level. The security desk was abandoned. The automated systems were locked in safe mode, the turnstiles open and dead. Arthur pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped out onto Wacker Drive. It was 5:45 a.m. The biting, crisp wind rolling off Lake Michigan hit his face, smelling of fresh water, distant exhaust, and the raw electric promise of the morning. The sky above the eastern horizon was a bruised, magnificent canvas of deep violet, giving way to bleeding gold. The city was just beginning to stir. The distant, rhythmic clatter of an L train echoed between the concrete canyons. A street sweeper rumbled slowly down the avenue, its heavy brushes spinning, scrubbing the asphalt clean of the night's debris. Arthur took a deep breath of the freezing air, feeling it fill his lungs. He shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his faded coveralls. He had no severance package. He had no pension. He had no grand fortune hidden away in the Caymans. He was exactly what he had always been. A nobody. Arthur smiled, a small, genuine expression that reached the corners of his eyes. He turned his collar up against the Chicago wind and walked down the avenue, his silhouette dissolving into the golden light of the rising sun, leaving no footprint behind.